Chapter 10 Nightmare in Church Houses. Before I head to the church, I decide I would sleep in my newly acquired apartment, as I was eager to revisit the strange dream that had vanished from the balcony, before it had disappeared too deeply into sleep. As I settled upon the bed, I proudly looked upon the congealing peace that I had created earlier. With the vision behind my eyes, I drifted into slumber. Unfortunately, sleep did not bring me any closer to the desired dream, but it did manage to supply me with a glimpse of something that slept beneath the city. I saw strange coffins nestled into the dirt, waiting like monsters under a child's bed, far deeper into the black soil within the strum of the earth. So old it was, little more than liquid darkness. I spied a casket the length of the entire city. The dream conducted my vision beyond the petrified wood of the coffin's construction, allowing me to peer at the thing that lay within, rotting and waiting within the deep, damp, titanic box was an entity as ancient within the world as it was utter alien to it. The sound of the creature's patience was bottomless and beckoning. I could only guess at what earthly death could transmit life to something so far beyond all of this blowing dust. I immediately understood why the white Gia had pressed the thing so closely to her bosom. For it life were to reach such a thing. As I drifted away from a timeless sleeper, a new and now familiar gaze burned into my dream, looking at me with equally bottomless and beckoning impatience. I could feel the scorching hunger of countless wolves wash across me like a swirling wind. My dream was melting from the mounting heat, rendering voluminous visions into a single surging stare. The dream was no longer my own, and the dreamer was crushing me into the shape of a wolf. A monstrous hunger began to overfill my new dimensions, and I couldn't contain the emptiness. I sprang awake in a slick of sweat. With an endless hunger, I moved from the bed and collected my family. They seemed every bit as ravenous as the wolves. We would all need to feed soon. The dream of hunger was no longer new to me, but now its appetite had escaped from sleep and had taken refuge with us all. My sisters, near frenzy, begging me to take them to the church. My father's powerful hands took me about the shoulders and pushed me from the room out of the apartment house into the night. I forced myself to slacken my pace and absorb the sights as I traveled. From the moon-frosted meadows, I could better see the corpse of the town splayed out amid the encroaching forest. The town was like some dead brown and drying serpent's husk, the crooked bramble spines occasionally breaking the surface of the treetops, revealing the places where I had fallen so many years ago. I tried to focus on Mr. Trill and the lost dream he would finally recall, but my father's strength was much greater than my own, and I quickly found myself lifted into the shadows and surrounded the church. My hunter's silence spread out all around me, and my thoughts disappeared into my sister's bright smiles. Chapter 11, Where Angels No Longer Tread. The church was deserted, long since abandoned by the Lord and his flock. I entered through the front door and beheld the silence, as was old and unbroken blossomed the desert of dust that lie across the altars and pews. I moved to the rear of the church, leaving the silence as I found it. The rooms in the back contained nothing of interest save for the pleasant comfort of forgotten places, having slipped quietly beyond the boundaries of memory, tumbling into oblivion. I moved to the cellar door, the cold feeling of underground places lapping at my feet. Strangely, it was nailed shut from the opposite side. I wondered if Mr. Trill had some idea that I would be calling on him. Perhaps he received a warning from something that walked behind the world, an opposing force to that which invited me to transform Mr. Trill, allowing him to prepare for my coming. However, if nailed-up doors were all he could offer, I returned to the exterior of the church looking for a way into the cellar. Locating an entrance proved more difficult than I expected, as it was cleverly concealed beneath the ruins of an old shed. I opened the hidden door, and a new silence overtook me. The sound of waiting, the sound of a hunter, it permeated everything. The darkness and silence belonged to someone who had cultivated it, trained it, cared for it. I had carelessly allowed a thin blade of moonlight to slice past me when I opened the door. The cold light cut into the subterranean darkness, stabbing deep into the cellar. Quickly and quietly I closed the door, repairing the darkness. But the master of those deep places would already be alerted to my intrusion. I pressed on. I gave little thought to why this was happening, focusing exclusively on the what of it all. It was clear what I was stalking was no mere human, but a man of prey. Whether he was a true artist, however, remained to be seen. I joined my silence with that of the hunters, and I moved through the gloom to the bottom of the stairs. Somewhere deep within, a weak light flickered, candlelight. This was either a distraction or another signpost. The smell of burning wax hung thick. The candles were lit long before I entered the church. I moved closer to the flickering radiance, weary of a surprise. Somewhere, wrapped in obedient shadows, was the other. He would be waiting for me to make a mistake. I would make none. The darkness was not my own, but it would serve me nonetheless. I slipped behind the shifting shadows of candlelit room. The chamber was large and crowded as the trembling light revealed the bodies of over a dozen crucified men. They were arranged in no discernible order, most little more than crumbled paper dolls of desiccated skin. Death had frozen horrified and pleading expressions to their faces, save one, the most recent victim, a corpse less than a week old, wore a death mask of an entirely different disposition. Rage. This man had been fierce even in death, and his sunken eyes still held an echo of terrible and interrupted purpose. My host in the darkness had killed one of his own. Hayden Trill was indeed an artist. Chapter 12. The Shepherd of Wolves. The dead men and their crosses looked like giant crumbling flowers as they emerged from the rich soil of darkness that covered the cold floor. The dusky basement of the church seemed like a greenhouse designed to foster the development of those wonderful dead floral, a garden of decay and shadows. The darkest flower loomed above me. Its thorns were an internal and cutting stare, its fragrance a heady mixture of withered rage and interrupted purpose. The crucified hunter's shadow fell across me, and I tumbled into an icy hollow left behind as he terrible dream. The garden was pruned and pampered, carefully arranged and maintained with diligence of a doting mother. I wondered what manner of thing would want me to destroy such an artist. Yet There was a sense of preservation and escalation to my collision course with Mr. Trill and his dream, as if the beauty of a man's work required my intervention to allow it to spread, to take root. There were books and journals scattered across the nearby table. Rude though it may be, I began to read from them. The books were all so very pious, bordering and pretentious. The journals, however, were not difficult to tolerate. There were the reflections of a man who lived inside a cold oblation, a mechanical penance that unfolded with small emphasis upon its material effects. The reward of his labor was intangible and withheld merely to hope of reward. His deathly garden was not at an end, but rather a beautiful and necessary side effect of his means. He was an unconscious artist, perhaps the most powerful kind of artist, one who forgets themselves entirely within their creation, becoming the purest medium for dream. I didn't need to read the journals long to realize the identity of the man I hunted. He was known as the Crucifier. It was a much less subtle title than my own, and I'm fairly certain I missed the point of his undertaking entirely, much as my title missed the point of my work, subtly or no. According to one of his journals, he saw himself as the reincarnated fifth perfect of Judah, Pontius Pilate. His profession was nothing less than the destruction of all false prophets, which, from the number of his works, were more numerous than I would have expected. I went about reading the journals in an attempt to convince my prey that I had taken well off my guard, to absorbing in the matters of his dark dream, to pay any attention to my surroundings. But I found something as I read, something that truly stunned me, a drawing of a pack of demonic hungry wolves. It was as if the Crucifier had transferred the image directly from my own dream into his notebook. However, the picture included an alien figure. A solitary creature stood amid the sea of wolves, hooded and gripping a red crock. The words scrawled above this strange being read, "The Shepherd of Wolves." Unfortunate me, my complaisance cost me my vigilance. I had committed a potentially fatal mistake. The Crucifier sat upon me from behind the shadows, cloaked in the hunter's silence. Chapter 13. A Meeting of Artists. I was at last face to face with the darkest dream of Hayden Trill, a hunter more commonly known as the Crucifier. As he charged from the deep blackness beyond the light, my sister was already grinning through the shadows, whispering a warning from between her metal teeth. I shifted several steps backwards, placing my prey in front of the candles, a glowing silhouette for a target. A hammer descended upon me in a blur, and I seized the arms that held it. I tossed Mr. Trill into the darkness that obeyed him, cowing the shadows that tried to raise against me at his behest. Across the chamber I heard his hammer fall to the floor, far behind the candlelight. I closed the distance, and the hunter bent low, avoiding flashing teeth. He lunged at me with the force of a bull, seizing control of his shadows through brute force. I rooted myself deep within them. I stood immovable. His momentum crashed into me like black waves of an angry ocean against the face of an uncaring cliff. He stumbled backward, stunned. I delivered him to the ground with a fist, readying both sisters for the kill. Immediately, Mr. Trill was thrown from the floor as if by unseen hands, brandishing a small silver blade. It hissed like a snake as it coiled, striking out all around me in a flurry of movement. My sisters greeted polished fangs with steel smiles, filling the air with their glittered laughter. I assessed my opponent's strength from our brief collision. It was zealous, conditioned well beyond ordinary limits. However, our respective might as an exclusion of our dreams, and mine were the night terror to his nightmare. I realized this as well. He attempted a formidable retreat, at one point drawing a blade arc in his wake and nearly opened my retina. I would have happily allowed him escape, call it courtesy between predators, but he was on my list. As the crucifier tried to disappear into the darkness I stole from him, a sister left my grip, flying across the room and finding his spine. His body fell at the feet of his own shadow, stretching long and twisted by the dancing candlelight. His eyes glowed with a fury, raging at an unresponsive body, at all shadows, and no longer obeyed. I loomed over him in a new darkness. I let him see the shadows that once belonged to him fill my eyes. No words were exchanged, for really, what was there to say? Suddenly, from upon my back, I could feel a terrible unrest. Father was awake. I lifted my great father from his resting place, swinging him high above my head, his edged face gleaming with an amber glow of candlelight. The massive axe passed through the crippled hunter so smoothly, I thought I had missed him entirely.